Am I the asshole for going no contact with my mother after discovering that she was secretly poisoning my wife by replacing her fertility medications? Hey, before we move on to the video, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Thanks. I never thought I'd be writing this, but after everything that's happened over the past 4 years, I need to know if I'm completely justified or if I've gone too far. This is going to be extremely long, but I promise every detail is crucial to understanding just how twisted this situation became. My wife Sarah, 29F, and I, 32M, have been married for 5 years, together for 8. When we decided to start trying for a baby 3 years ago, we thought it would be straightforward. Sarah has always been healthy, athletic, no medical issues. I had no reason to think we'd have problems. My mother Patricia, 58F, was over the moon when we told her we were trying. She's worked as a pharmacy technician at Regional Medical Center for over 20 years and immediately started giving us advice about prenatal vitamins, tracking ovulation, the whole 9 yards. At first, I thought it was sweet how invested she was in us having a baby. Sarah and I tried naturally for about 8 months before getting worried. Patricia kept reassuring us that it was normal, that we just needed to be patient. But when nothing happened after a year, we decided to see a fertility specialist. That's when Patricia really stepped up her involvement. She recommended Dr. Martinez, who practiced at her hospital. She said he was the best in the state, that she'd seen him help countless couples, and that working at the hospital, she could even help coordinate our care and make sure everything went smoothly. Looking back, I should have been suspicious of how eager she was to insert herself into our medical care, but at the time, I was grateful for any help we could get. Dr. Martinez was thorough, I'll give him that. After initial testing showed some minor hormonal imbalances in Sarah, he put her on a comprehensive treatment plan. The medication list was extensive: Clomid for ovulation, metformin for insulin resistance, prenatal vitamins, folic acid, CoQ10, progesterone suppositories, and several others. The monthly cost was staggering, easily $800 to $1,200 depending on the cycle. This is where my mother really became our savior, or so I thought. She offered to pick up Sarah's medications using her employee discount and connections at the hospital pharmacy. She said she could save us hundreds of dollars each month and make sure Sarah never missed a dose. Patricia would bring the medications over personally, often with home-cooked meals, and she even created a detailed schedule for Sarah to follow. I was working long hours at my engineering firm, trying to cover the costs of fertility treatments that insurance barely touched. Sarah had reduced her hours at her marketing job to accommodate all the doctor's appointments and deal with the side effects of the medications. Having my mother handle the medication logistics felt like a godsend. But as months went by, Sarah's condition deteriorated in ways that seemed extreme even for fertility treatments. She gained almost 50 pounds in the first year of treatment. Her hair started falling out in clumps. She developed severe acne, mood swings that would leave her sobbing for hours, and chronic fatigue that made it hard for her to function. I kept asking Dr. Martinez if this was normal, but he assured us that some women just respond more dramatically to hormone therapy. He'd adjust dosages, switch medications, but Sarah never seemed to improve. In fact, she often got worse after starting a new medication. My mother was incredibly supportive throughout this time. She'd come over 3 or 4 times a week, bringing food, cleaning our house, and making sure Sarah took her medications exactly on schedule. She'd sit with Sarah during her worst days, rubbing her back while she threw up, bringing her herbal tea, being the perfect mother-in-law. But there were little things that bothered me, though I couldn't put my finger on why. Patricia would always insist on organizing Sarah's medications herself, claiming that her pharmacy background made her better at keeping track of everything. She'd get defensive if Sarah or I tried to handle the pills ourselves, saying things like, "You don't want to mess up the timing and waste a whole cycle, do you?" She also became increasingly critical of Sarah in subtle ways. Comments about how Sarah needed to stay positive because stress could prevent pregnancy. Suggestions that maybe Sarah should try harder with her diet and exercise, despite the fact that the medications were clearly causing her weight gain and fatigue. Little digs about how some women's bodies just aren't meant for motherhood, always followed by reassurances that she didn't mean Sarah specifically. The turning point came in month 22 of treatment. Sarah had been on a new medication protocol for 3 months, and instead of improving, she developed what looked like early signs of diabetes. Her blood sugar was erratic, she was constantly thirsty, and she'd started getting dizzy spells. Dr. Martinez wanted to add medication for the diabetes symptoms, But something about the whole situation finally made me suspicious. I started researching Sarah's medications online, reading about side effects and interactions. That's when I discovered that several of the pills she was taking could cause the exact symptoms she was experiencing, but only in much higher doses than what was prescribed. I also learned that some of the medications could actually prevent pregnancy if taken incorrectly or in the wrong combinations. I decided to do something I probably should have done months earlier. I took one of Sarah's pill bottles and drove it to a different pharmacy across town, telling them I wanted to verify that I was giving my wife the correct medication. The pharmacist looked at the pills under a microscope and ran some tests. What he told me changed everything. The pills in Sarah's Clomid bottle weren't Clomid at all. They were actually a combination of different medications, including some that weren't even related to fertility treatment. One was a mild diuretic that would cause dehydration and electrolyte imbalances. Another was an antihistamine that could cause drowsiness and weight gain. There was even what appeared to be a small amount of a medication used to treat thyroid disorders, which would explain Sarah's hair loss and metabolism issues. I was shaking when I left that pharmacy. I drove straight home and gathered every single one of Sarah's medications, probably 15 different bottles. Then I drove to 3 different pharmacies and had them all analyzed. Not a single medication was what it was supposed to be. Every single pill bottle contained either completely different medications or, in some cases, what appeared to be placebos made from compressed powder and food coloring. Sarah had been taking a random cocktail of drugs for almost 2 years, none of which were intended to help her get pregnant. Some of them were actively harmful, explaining why she'd been getting sicker and sicker. I sat in my car outside the last pharmacy for an hour, trying to process what this meant. My mother, the woman who had raised me, who I trusted completely, had been systematically poisoning my wife for nearly 2 years. She had access to the hospital pharmacy, knowledge of medications, and she'd been personally delivering these fake pills to us multiple times a week. But why? What possible reason could she have for sabotaging our efforts to have a baby? I drove home and found Sarah napping on the couch, looking pale and exhausted as she had for months. I didn't tell her what I'd discovered yet. Instead, I called in sick to work and spent the rest of the day researching everything I could about the medication Sarah had actually been taking. The picture that emerged was horrifying. The combination of drugs could cause most of the symptoms Sarah had been experiencing: weight gain, hair loss, mood swings, fatigue, digestive issues, skin problems, and irregular menstrual cycles. Some of the medications could even cause insulin resistance and pre-diabetic symptoms. My mother hadn't just been preventing us from getting pregnant. She'd been slowly making Sarah sick, potentially causing long-term health problems that could affect her for years. That evening, I made a decision that probably saved my marriage and Sarah's health. I told Sarah I was concerned about potential medication interactions and that I wanted her to stop taking everything for a few days while we got a second opinion from a different doctor. She was so exhausted and miserable that she agreed immediately. Then I called my mother and asked her to come over. I told her I needed to discuss something important about Sarah's treatment. When Patricia arrived, she was carrying her usual bag of medications for Sarah and a casserole for dinner. She seemed cheerful and concerned as always, asking how Sarah was feeling and whether she'd been taking her pills on schedule. I waited until she'd sat down in our living room, until she'd asked her usual questions about Sarah's symptoms and Dr. Martinez's latest recommendations. Then I placed all of Sarah's pill bottles on the coffee table between us. "Mom," I said, "I had Sarah's medications analyzed by 3 different pharmacists today." The change in her expression was immediate and unmistakable. The concerned, caring facade dropped completely, replaced by something cold and calculating that I'd never seen before. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice was different. Flat. "The Clomid isn't Clomid. The metformin isn't metformin. None of these medications are what they're supposed to be. You've been giving Sarah random drugs for almost 2 years." Patricia sat perfectly still for a long moment. Then she started to speak, and what came out of her mouth was so far from the mother I thought I knew that I wondered if I was having some kind of breakdown. "Sarah isn't right for this family," she said calmly. "I could see it from the beginning. She's not strong enough, not committed enough. She doesn't understand what it means to be part of our family." I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. "You deserve better than her," Patricia continued. "Someone who can actually give you children, someone who comes from a good family. Sarah's people are weak. Look at her parents, divorced, her brother's been in rehab twice. That's not the kind of genetics you want for your children. So you decided to poison her? I managed to say. I decided to protect you, she snapped. You were so determined to make this work with her, you wouldn't listen to reason. I thought if the fertility treatments didn't work, you'd eventually realize that Sarah wasn't meant to be a mother. You'd see that the universe was telling you something. You made her sick. You've been slowly killing her. Patricia's expression shifted again, becoming almost sad. I never intended for her to get that sick. I was just preventing pregnancy. But then she kept getting worse, and I thought maybe it was for the best. Maybe she'd realize on her own that she wasn't cut out for this. I felt like I was talking to a stranger wearing my mother's face. Do you understand what you've done? Sarah could have permanent health problems from the medications you've been giving her. She could have died. Don't be so dramatic, Patricia said dismissively. I know medications. I've been working with them for 20 years. I was careful. Careful. I stood up, my hands shaking. She's developed prediabetes, lost half her hair, gained 50 pounds, and been miserable for 2 years because of you. She would have been miserable anyway, Patricia said coldly. Some women just aren't meant to be mothers. I was doing you both a favor. That's when Sarah appeared in the doorway. She'd been napping upstairs, but had apparently woken up and heard voices. She looked between us, confused and concerned. What's going on? She asked. I looked at my wife, this woman I loved who had been suffering for 2 years, who had blamed herself for our inability to conceive, who had endured horrible side effects because she thought it would help us have a baby. And I looked at my mother, sitting calmly on our couch, completely unrepentant about what she'd done. Sarah, I said, sit down. There's something you need to know. Telling Sarah the truth was the hardest conversation of my life. Watching her face as she realized that her suffering had been intentional, that someone she'd trusted and cared about had been systematically harming her, was devastating. She didn't cry or scream. She just sat very still and asked quiet questions about what medications she'd actually been taking and what the health implications might be. Patricia tried to defend herself, even tried to convince Sarah that this had all been for the best, that Sarah should be grateful because now she knew she wasn't meant to have children and could move on with her life. Sarah listened to all of this with an expression I'd never seen before, then simply asked Patricia to leave our house. You need to go, Sarah said quietly. Right now. Patricia looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to mediate or defend her or something. Instead, I walked to the front door and held it open. Get out, I said. Don't come back. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of damage control. We immediately stopped all of Sarah's medications and found a new fertility specialist at a different hospital. Dr. Chen was horrified when we explained what had happened and insisted on running comprehensive blood work to check for any lasting effects from the unknown medications Sarah had been taking. We also contacted a lawyer, though prosecuting Patricia turned out to be more complicated than we'd hoped. Proving that she'd intentionally switched medications was difficult without direct evidence, and the statute of limitations on some of the potential charges had already passed. However, our lawyer did help us report Patricia to the State Pharmacy Board and her employer. The investigation into Patricia's conduct at the hospital revealed that this wasn't the first time she'd been suspected of medication irregularities. There had been complaints about missing pills and inventory discrepancies, but nothing had been proven until our case. She was immediately suspended and eventually fired. Her pharmacy technician license was revoked permanently. Meanwhile, Sarah's health began to improve almost immediately once she stopped taking the fake medications. Within a month, her energy levels increased dramatically. Her skin cleared up, her hair stopped falling out, and she started losing the weight she gained. Most importantly, her menstrual cycle regulated for the first time in 2 years. Dr. Chen put Sarah on a much simpler, more conservative treatment plan. Just basic ovulation tracking and a single, mild fertility medication to regulate her hormones. Within 3 months, Sarah felt better than she had in years. And then, in month 4 of legitimate treatment, Sarah got pregnant. I'll never forget the moment she showed me the positive pregnancy test. We both cried, but they were complicated tears. Joy and relief mixed with anger and grief for the 2 years we'd lost, for the suffering Sarah had endured, for the trust that had been shattered. Patricia called constantly during Sarah's pregnancy. She left voicemails crying and apologizing, claiming she'd made a mistake, that she'd been trying to help in her own misguided way. She sent cards and gifts, tried to reach out through other family members, even showed up at our house twice before I threatened to call the police. Her story kept changing. Sometimes she claimed she'd been trying to protect Sarah from medications that were too strong. Other times she insisted she'd been trying to help us save money by providing generic alternatives. Once, she even claimed that Dr. Martinez had asked her to make the substitutions, though Dr. Martinez confirmed this was completely false. But the truth would slip out in her more emotional voicemails. She'd talk about how Sarah wasn't good enough for me, how our children would be better off not existing than having Sarah as a mother, how she'd been trying to save me from making the biggest mistake of my life. I saved every voicemail, every text message, every piece of evidence of her continued harassment. I wanted documentation in case we ever needed a restraining order. Sarah's pregnancy was healthy and normal, everything we dreamed it would be. Dr. Chen monitored her carefully for any lasting effects from the medications she'd taken, but aside from some initial concerns about blood sugar levels, everything progressed perfectly. When Sarah was about 7 months pregnant, the harassment from Patricia escalated. She started calling Sarah's work, trying to convince her coworkers that Sarah was making up lies about her. She contacted Sarah's parents, claiming that Sarah had developed a mental illness and was having delusions about being poisoned. She even tried to contact Dr. Chen's office, claiming to be concerned about Sarah's mental state and asking them not to believe anything Sarah said about her medical history. That's when I finally got the restraining order. Our daughter Emma was born healthy and perfect after a smooth delivery. Holding her for the first time, seeing Sarah's face when Emma was placed on her chest, I felt complete in a way I hadn't known was possible. But I also felt a deep, burning anger that Patricia had tried to steal this from us. Patricia's attempts to contact us became more desperate after Emma's birth. She sent gifts through other family members, left flowers on our doorstep, and even tried to visit Sarah at the hospital by claiming to be her mother-in-law. Hospital security had to escort her out. The voicemails became increasingly unhinged. She talked about her rights as a grandmother, about how we were depriving Emma of family, about how Sarah had turned me against her. She alternated between tearful apologies and angry accusations, sometimes within the same message. Other family members began pressuring us to reconcile. My father, who had divorced Patricia years earlier but maintained a relationship with her, called to tell me I was being too harsh. My aunt, Patricia's sister, sent long emails about forgiveness and family bonds. Even some of our friends suggested that Patricia had learned her lesson and deserved a chance to meet her granddaughter. But every time I wavered, I remembered Sarah's face when she realized what had been done to her. I remembered the 2 years of suffering, the health problems, the emotional trauma. I remembered Patricia sitting in our living room, completely unrepentant, telling us that Sarah deserved what had happened to her. Emma is now 8 months old, healthy and happy. Sarah has recovered completely from the effects of the fake medications, though she still has anxiety around taking any new prescriptions. We've started couples therapy to work through the trauma of what Patricia did to us, and individual therapy for both of us as well. Patricia continues to try to contact us, though less frequently now. She's moved to a different state, ostensibly to be closer to her sister, but I suspect it's because her reputation in our town was destroyed after word got out about what she'd done. Small communities don't forget things like systematically poisoning your daughter-in-law. Last month, she sent a card for Emma's first Christmas with a long letter claiming she'd found religion and wanted to make amends. She wrote about how she'd realized her actions were wrong, how she wanted to be part of Emma's life, how families should forgive each other's mistakes. I threw the card away without showing it to Sarah. Sometimes people ask me if I think I'm being too harsh, if I should give my mother another chance for Emma's sake. They point out that Patricia is Emma's only living grandmother. Sarah's mother passed away before we met, and that Emma might want a relationship with her someday. But here's what these people don't understand. Patricia didn't make a mistake. She didn't have a momentary lapse in judgment or get carried away with good intentions. For nearly 2 years, she looked Sarah in the eye multiple times a week while deliberately giving her medications that were making her sick. She watched Sarah suffer and blamed Sarah for her own suffering. She had countless opportunities to stop, to confess, to change course, and she never did. The only reason she stopped was because she got caught. Even now, in her letters and voicemails, Patricia doesn't take full responsibility for what she did. She minimizes it, makes excuses, tries to shift blame. She talks about her actions as mistakes rather than the deliberate, sustained campaign of sabotage they actually were. I don't trust her around my daughter. I don't trust her around my wife. I don't trust her, period. So no, I don't think I'm being too harsh. I think I'm protecting my family from someone who has proven she's willing to harm us when she disagrees with our choices. I think I'm making sure that my daughter grows up safe from someone who believes that the ends justify any means, no matter how cruel. Emma will have plenty of love in her life from people who actually care about her well-being. She'll have Sarah's extended family, my father and his new wife, our close friends who have become chosen family. She doesn't need a grandmother who sees her as a tool to manipulate her parents or who might decide that Emma isn't good enough for our family either. But I still wonder sometimes if I'm doing the right thing. Am I depriving Emma of a relationship that could be meaningful? Am I letting my anger override what might be best for my daughter? Should I consider supervised visits or some kind of limited contact? These doubts usually last about 5 minutes until I remember what Patricia is actually capable of. Until I think about Sarah's face when she realized what had been done to her. Until I consider what Patricia might do if she decides Emma or Sarah still isn't meeting her standards. Then I'm certain again that no contact is the only safe choice for my family. So, ATA for going no contact with my mother after she systematically poisoned my wife and sabotaged our efforts to have a child? For refusing to let her meet her granddaughter? For not accepting her apologies or giving her a chance to make amends? I don't think I am, but after everything we've been through, I sometimes question my own judgment. The people pressuring us to reconcile make it sound like I'm being unreasonable, like I should be able to move past this for the sake of family harmony. But I can't move past it. I won't move past it. What Patricia did wasn't just cruel, it was evil. And I refuse to expose my family to that kind of evil again, no matter what anyone else thinks I should do. My wife and daughter deserve better than that. They deserve to be safe, and as long as I have any control over it, that's exactly what they'll be. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button.